Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Tonight, my guest is Jim Willis. Before I bring him on, I have to, of course, thank C60 Purple Power. They are the amazing company that produces this awesome super antioxidant. It acts as a free radical sponge, eliminating toxins in the body. It has me feeling better than I've felt in years, and you should too. Go check out their website to learn more about this. Just click the link in the description or visit c60purplepower.com. And you can use coupon code knowledge10 if that link doesn't work by any chance. You're going to get 10% off your order plus free shipping. Also, please subscribe to Forbidden Knowledge News on lbry.com. It's our official backup channel. We're always on all your popular podcast platforms. And we have a brand new show called Beyond Classified. It is exclusively on Rokfin, which is an amazing new platform for free thinking content creators and independent media. It's not just us on there. You're going to get shows like Leak Project, Charlie Robinson, Sam Tripoli, Jimmy Dore, many more. It's a great new platform, and all of our stuff, all of our content that you can't get on YouTube, all the controversial things that you used to hear from us, it will be on Rokfin. And all those links are now in the description. Tonight, I want to welcome back to the show Jim Willis. After graduating from the Eastman School of Music, he was a high school band and orchestra teacher during the day, and a symphony trombonist on the weekends, and jazz musician at night, and choral conductor on Sunday mornings, before earning his master's degree in religion and entering the Protestant ministry for 40 years. He is the author of 13 books on spirituality and lost civilizations. He has served as an adjunct college professor in the fields of world religions and instrumental music. He is also a guest lecturer, speaking about topics ranging from historical studies to contemporary spirituality. His recent books include Lost Civilizations, The Quantum Akashic Field, Hidden History, Ancient Aliens, and the Suppressed Origins of Civilization, and Censoring God, the Suppression of the Lost Books of the Bible and Other Scriptures. He will also be a presenter at this year's upcoming Forbidden Knowledge NewsCon. Jim, welcome back. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well, Chris. Good to be with you again, as always.
It is. It's great to be with you. And like we were saying before we started rolling here, so much has happened since we last spoke. And
wow. Yes.
we live in a completely different world than we did pre-2020. I mean, I always say if you would have woke up, if you've been in a coma for the past year and a half and you woke up now, you'd be like, what is going on? This is like the worst science fiction movie I've ever seen. But it's really a critical point, I believe, in our modern history when it comes to us, the discoveries about ourselves, and everything that's happening around it. We've got crazy UFO talk. These are very interesting times that we're living. And I'd like to know, how has things been for you and your family during these times?
You know, personally, it hasn't made a lot of difference physically because we moved out here to the woods down in South Carolina 11 years ago. And we've been self-quarantining the whole time. Days go by when we don't see anybody. So it hasn't been that much of a change for us personally, except I've noticed a tremendous change spiritually. Like most people, I find myself stuck in front of the TV watching the news. I want to know what's going on. And you feel that the tension and the anxiety in the news when you hear the numbers build up about people who were hit by COVID, and you feel all that, you internalize all that. And of course, with all the political stuff and all the economic stuff and with all the other things going on, it affects your mind to the point where I'm finding it very difficult to do the kind of meditation I'm used to, the kind of meditation I need to do. My mind just seems to fly off, and I'm using every trick I've invented over the last 20, 30 years of meditation. But it's hard. The whole vibration of the planet is caught up in this, and I don't think we can ignore it. I think it's really serious. So it's difficult in another way too, in that I write books, of course. Now, books are a pretty introspective thing. When I'm in the process of writing, days might go by without hardly talking to anybody. And then all of a sudden I started talking about the books, and I'm out here, like for instance, with you folks, talking to your listening base and your viewership. And I'm listening to the television, and I'm out there in the world again. And so I get right back into that whole thing that I tried to escape when I came out here in the woods in the first place. And it's tough. It's tough. I'd love to say that I'm this great, got it all together spiritual guy, but man, it is a tough time. It is a tough time.
Yeah, and before I forget, speaking of, your own personal journey and living out in the woods, you were telling me that you had a very interesting story to tell about your retirement when you first moved out there, and I'd love to hear about that.
Oh yeah. When I retired from 40 years in the Protestant ministry, and of course I was doing a lot of other things too, but I was a Protestant minister for 40 years with all the things that a regular minister had. And I think the last time we talked, I mentioned that I'd had this crazy idea that when you go into the church, you're going to be surrounding yourself with this great spiritual community, and people are going to be just involved with spiritual growth. And of course, it is that way. You get tied up and you get going on all these things. So when we came out here, I had a Bible verse in mind. When I retired, I deliberately wanted to spend the time to try to confront the reality, the spiritual reality, the source, God, that I had been talking about my whole life and never really taken the time to connect with in the way I wanted. So I came out here and I actually had a Bible verse in mind. That Bible verse comes from the book of Genesis. It was from the story of Jacob and Esau. Jacob and Esau were brothers, and for those of you who are not familiar with the story, they had a falling out when Jacob tried to cheat Esau out of his birthright. And basically, Jacob had to flee for his life, and he left the place that we know right now as Israel and headed north. And he wound up probably in what we would call Anatolia or Western Turkey today. It's up where Abraham came from, up in the same place where Göbekli Tepe was built, up in that same neck of the woods. But after a long time, he decided to come back, and he was going to be reconciled with his brother Esau, when the craziest thing happened. The night before they were scheduled to meet, he was on one side of the river, Esau was on the other side of a river, and Jacob was doing what we all do when we get anxious and worried, and he was walking up and down, and all of a sudden he said he saw what he thought was a man. And they decided to wrestle. It says something about his frame of mind, I guess. And they wrestled all night long until finally Jacob figured out that he was wrestling with God. Now, of course, I read this as a metaphor, but here was Jacob wrestling with God all night long until finally the sun began to come up, and Jacob said the most amazing thing. He said, "I will not let you go until you bless me." Now, if you look right over my left shoulder back here, you'll see a picture. You may not be able to see it too well on your camera, but it's a picture of Jacob wrestling with God, saying, "I will not let you go until you bless me." That was the verse that was in my mind. I wanted to come out here to the woods and confront the essential reality that I had called God. It was Source, Manitou, Brahman, all the different names that people give that great spiritual entity, which is the source of all things. So I came out here thinking I was going to wrestle with God, and I was going to wrestle with for a year. Well, it's been 11 years, but couple of years into the wrestling match, I discovered that lo and behold, God had answered my prayers. I wrestled with God until God blessed me. And God appeared not as out of the Christian faith that I had been practicing for the last 40 years. And it's a total different reality, a reality that probably would have been much more familiar to what we would call the shamanistic view or the natural view today. Well, with that in mind, I had a wonderful opportunity. A couple of years ago, I was asked to go to Cornwall in England, and over there I met some wonderful people who were members of the British Dowsing Society, and I was asked to give a talk about the birth of world religions and how they are connected and what's at the basis of all of them. As a matter of fact, the essence of that talk is on my YouTube page. You can probably find it. I think it's called One Ring to Rule Them All or something like that. It's on my YouTube page. But at any rate, I was out there and I had a wonderful time with these people. They were great. As a matter of fact, I'm doing a conference with them next month. I'll be presenting virtually, of course, through Zoom, a thing about dowsing and dowsing for healing and health and spiritual hunger. Well, I was out there. I had to make a side trip when I finished my business down in Cornwall. I had a great time dowsing with some of the great ley line people, and John Moss, who was very much influential in the British Dowsing Society. He and I went out. We dowsed the Merry Maidens and visited Stonehenge and, of course, all the things. But my ancestors years ago, I mean, I'm talking 300-400 years ago, were members of the clergy. They were with the English version at that point, so to speak, Church of England, that had broken off from the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church. And my ancestors used to preach in a little church in a little town called Fenny-Compton. It's up northwest of London. And so I made arrangements to go up there and stay in an inn. I had a wonderful time up there with meeting the people in Fenny-Compton. And the town historian took me into the very same church where my ancestors used to preach. It was a humbling time. And I walked up into the pulpit and I stood there in the pulpit where my great grandfather, way back when, Willis, preached. The historian showed me the plaque on the wall that honored him, and showed me the place where he lived, which is now just a mound because the house is long gone, of course. But the brick, not the brick, but the stone church still was there. And it was just exactly as it was when he was there, pretty much. So I walked up into the pulpit, and standing in the pulpit where my ancestor preached, I looked around and there was a stained glass window that could only be viewed properly from the pulpit. He looked at it every single Sunday. And it was a subject that I had never before seen in a stained glass window. It was the picture depicting Jacob wrestling with Esau, saying, "I will not let you go until you bless me."
Wow.
Now, I can't, my hair stood up on end. I mean, it was just unbelievable. I can't imagine how that spiritual DNA was passed down in my family from generation to generation to generation, somehow wound up in me. And there, that very same scripture verse that he saw every single Sunday was the verse that inspired me to come out here. And it changed my spiritual outlook completely.
Yeah.
I'll never forget it. Never forget it.
Yeah, I believe that there are certain times where we experience these synchronicities and signs that if we can't ignore, we have to follow. You know, there's certain things that happen in our lives, like the experience you just spoke of, that I think are meant to lead us in a certain direction, especially if you're at a point where you're not sure and this sign appears at that time. You know, that's your answer, I believe, for me.
Yeah. And it was so real. You know, you read about these things or you hear about these things, and I was always, in the past, I would hear about something like this and I'd say, yeah, well, okay, coincidence, you know, something like that. But boy, when you experience it, all of a sudden your eyes are open and you realize that there's something bigger than you that's guiding you through life. It's a comforting feeling, especially in these difficult times in which we live. It's nice to know that there's something bigger than us that's really in charge and is going to see us through.
Yeah, definitely. It is a great feeling, and I've experienced it myself recently with some experiences that I've had. And I think that
I was going to ask you about that. Last time we talked, you said you had your first out of body experience. Have you had a follow up on that since?
Yes. Since then, I've had a couple of more, and
great,
I
wonderful.
got to speak with what I believe are what I can only describe as angelic beings, and have conversations, psychic conversations with these beings, and it's just amazing to experience something like that. And the feeling of love that comes along with it is it's amazing. Like it's nothing you can experience on Earth.
When they talk to you or when they teach you, does it come word for word, or does it come in a block of teaching that somehow
It,
you just understand all of
it
a
is.
sudden?
It's like a block sometimes, and
Ah,
sometimes
there it
it's like
is. Yeah.
images and feelings. It's not necessarily a fluid conversation, but
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
it does come in blocks of information often. Yes.
Very, very common. That's wonderful. Oh, Chris, congratulations. Yeah, you've really broken through to something. I wish I could have done it when I was your age. I had to wait till later on in life.
Yeah, well, I was asking for it at the time. I really wanted to
Great,
delve into
great,
that and
wonderful.
explore it. So, yeah, it's really helped me
Mhm.
in to continue that journey and kind of focus more on meditation and being able to achieve states like that, which I want to talk
Yeah,
about a little later too.
sure.
But what I want to start with is your book, Censoring God. I think it has many parallels to what's occurring today around the world, especially when
Yeah,
you look at
yeah.
censorship and our personal freedoms, even religious freedoms. No matter what religion you believe, it seems worldwide they're being suppressed, to say the least.
Mhm.
Do you
Yeah.
see the same kind of spiritual censorship happening right now?
Yes, I do. Censoring God is scheduled to come out on April 1st. It's in the printing stage right now. But when I was doing Censoring God, it came out of the knowledge that we like to think, or we are taught, that somehow the Bible or any of the religious scriptures from any of the great religions, that they come to us straight out of the mouth of God. God says it, and there it is. It's in the Bible. Unfortunately, the more you study this and the more you begin to understand how these texts were put together, you understand that there's a committee between us and the original writers. The original writers, I think many of them were shamanistic in Ezekiel in the Old Testament, Elijah, Isaiah. They talk about experiences which are very common to the shamanic tradition. And then along comes a committee who decides what we're going to get and what we aren't. And Censoring God is devoted to this particular thing. It talks about all kinds of books that we didn't know about, that have disappeared. Nobody knew anything about them until all of a sudden they appeared at the Dead Sea, at the Dead Sea Scrolls, or the Nag Hammadi manuscripts that were found in the desert. We kind of caught the committee in a kind of we caught them with their pants down, so to speak, in a couple of places. For instance, in the book of Genesis, they talk about this guy named Enoch, who suddenly walked with God and then he disappeared. And the book of Jude picks it up. And Jude tells us in the New Testament, little book of Jude, just one chapter long, just before the book of Revelation, says that Jude was prophesying about the angels and everything else. And so we knew that there was some character named Enoch, and we knew that these people were familiar with the book about him, but we didn't have the book. And so for hundreds and hundreds of years, that the book of Enoch remained hidden. We thought it was lost forever until a copy of it was found in, of all places, Ethiopia. And it was brought back to England and translated. Now, how did it get to Ethiopia? Well, that's a story that could take us for a full hour, so you'll have to get the book for that. But all of a sudden, after hundreds of years, thousands of years actually, we had finally in front of us the very same book that was read by the people who wrote not only some of the Old Testament, some of the New Testament. And now we can read this fantastic story about the inside story about how the angels saw that the daughters of men were fair and mated with them before the flood. And the flood was sent to destroy the offspring of these. And we read about the Nephilim, the mighty men of old. And all of a sudden, we have that book. So, what I tried to do in Censoring God was to bring all of this into a thing. Of course, it can't go into a lot of depth, but the book is a pretty big book. So, it goes into a lot of depth, but it brings out this idea that between us and the original writers, there stands a committee who had to decide what made the final cut and what didn't. And they often made their decisions not based on the spiritual things or even the historical things. They based their decisions on politics, on who wanted what in the Bible. Did Constantine want us to know about this because it seemed to imply something different? And so they would meet in Nicaea, or they would meet in Ethiopia, and they have all these different. Not in Ethiopia, but in Turkey, for instance, in Ephesus, and they would have these these meetings, and a lot of the decision was based on the politics of the day. Rome was trying, when the New Testament was put together, Rome was trying to bring the world together. One way to do that was through politics, but through religion. And so they wanted a religion that would bring everybody in and insist that if you're going to be here, a Roman citizen and a Christian, this is what you had to believe. So that's how the Bible was put together. Strange thing happened, though, because I discovered that this is the case not only in religion, this is the case in archaeology, it's the case in science, it's the case in physics. All of these things that come to us come through censors, which is one of the reasons I'm so glad for programs such as yours and programs you can see on television right now that can bypass the censors and bring all of this information to us. Now, is all of the information necessarily correct just because we bypassed the censors? Well, some of it is, some of it isn't, but at least we can make the choices rather than relying on some anonymous book of experts who lived 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, it was like they decided we couldn't think for ourselves at some point, and they would be providing us, spoon feeding us the information that they wanted us to know. But it was detrimental to us humans because now we have no idea who and what we are, where we came from, what sources. You know, we don't know our true human selves now because of this censorship.
Exactly.
And it's repeating itself.
Exactly.
It's repeating itself.
Oh, over and over again. In the book Censoring God, I begin with the story of the Smothers Brothers, believe it or not, and how their program was canceled, largely because the censors would not allow that. They were looking for an excuse. And I put a whole chapter, a couple of pages, all about how the Smothers Brothers seemed to be even the president of the United States at the time was watching that show and saying, I don't want people to hear this stuff. And so the censors got in the way and the program was taken off. So it wasn't that long ago. And I'm sure it's still being practiced today in ways that we will never fully understand. I'm always amazed at how people like politicians, for instance, can decide what we can have and we can't handle it. You know, that great line from the movie, you can't handle the truth. I don't want someone deciding that for me. I want to make up my own mind one way or the other.
Yeah, it just goes back to this divine right to rule mentality.
Yeah.
And you were talking about the Book of Enoch, which I currently have on the dresser next to my bed because I've been over the past few months reading it over and over, just going through some different verses. But it is really a fascinating book. I'd like to know how much of it you think is referring to the celestial beings and how much of it is metaphorical, such as fallen angels that mated with humans to bring forward these Nephilim.
15, 20 years ago, I would have said the whole thing was a big metaphor. I don't believe that anymore. There's just too much information there. If you want to just give a metaphor to teach a moral truth or a spiritual truth, you don't need to go into the kind of detail that is. As a matter of fact, he gives us so much detail that it almost gets in the way of the metaphor. Saying he met an angelic being, that's okay. That's a metaphor. But then all of a sudden, he decides to tell us their names. If it's just a metaphor, why does he have to give names to these angelic beings? I think that Enoch was a shaman. I think he was a pre-Diluvian shaman who had a tremendous spiritual wisdom. Now, a lot of his story may have been blown up over the time, but when I read the Book of Enoch now, I'm sensing a core of something that is very real, of something that really happened, and I'm hearing the voice of an early Hebrew writer, written much before the Old Testament that we know, and telling us a story of when he talks about being taken up into the heavens. I think it was a shamanic journey. I think he was having an out-of-body experience. And I think this out-of-body experience happened to other people, even in the Old Testament, people like Isaiah, who was taken up to the seventh heaven and heard of things that he couldn't even possibly describe and saw angelic beings. And this old motif comes back of human bodies with animal heads or wings, hybrid mixtures. Um, I just can't close my mind to the fact that there is so much more detail there, that if he just wanted to give us a spiritual lesson or impart a metaphorical allegory, he wouldn't have gone into that kind of detail, especially the kind of detail that people listening to it would be apt to say, "Oh, come on, angels with wings or bodies of humans." It would get in the way of his message, and instead he went overboard to try to say this is what happened. So yeah, I think that Enoch was a pre-Diluvian shaman who had real out-of-body experiences and described those experiences and his journeys. And I think we can get much more out of it if we'll just listen to it and read it with that kind of openness and with that kind of sincerity.
Yeah. Do you believe that these Nephilim? There's evidence that there were very tall. We could call them giants that were
Hmm.
walking the earth, and
Hmm.
there's evidence that these bones have been destroyed or hidden by institutions like the Smithsonian. What are your
Censoring
thoughts
again.
on
There we
the?
go.
Yes,
Yeah.
we're censoring again. Um, what are
Yeah.
your thoughts on the possibility of these giants that could have been, Nephilim that were spoken about in the Bible, that were just killed off over a period of time, I suppose.
Well, it's amazing. You can come into a pretty modern day and still find them. For instance, the diaries of those who sailed with Cortez in Florida, those who were the first Spanish to come onto the American continent. 300 years ago, they were talking, or 400 years ago, they were talking about coming into contact with actual people who lived there in Florida with massive stature, 7, 8 feet tall anyway, that really fit the definition of Genesis when they say the mighty men of renown. So you can find them really late in our history. I think also you can find them throughout mythology from different places. The idea of Enoch going up and discovering these beings on top of a mountain is really no different than the Greek legends or the Roman legends of Zeus, for instance, ruling from the mountaintop. And who ruled with him? The gods. And who were the gods? They were mighty men of old, men of renown. I think you can find that mythology scattered throughout our entire history. There's too much of it to just ignore, because it seems to us who live in this modern secular age, oh, come on, that can't be real. And we say, well, why can't it be real? Well, because I've never experienced it. Well, that means that the whole world is going to be governed by what we happen to experience. That's a pretty narrow experience. And I think if we let these myths just speak for themselves, and we find them in Peru, we find them in Europe, we find them in Russia, we find them in China, in Japan. I even think there are civilizations, for instance, of that are described kind of around the corner in places like the Bible and ancient Hebrew scripts that can teach us tremendous lessons that may even be our salvation. Let me just give you one example that I found fascinating. Um, in 16,500 years ago, now I'm just talking archaeology now, I'm not talking about mythology. 16,500 years ago, there were a people who lived in Japan called the Yoman. Their civilization gave so much to us. In 1995, off the coast of Okinawa, in Yonaguni, in Japan, there was underneath sometimes 200 feet of ocean, there was a great structure found buried beneath the sea. And a fisherman who in 1995 was diving and got too far off the coast of Okinawa saw this and came back and reported it. So they sent out people to discover whether this was a man-made structure or a natural occurring structure that was 200 feet below the ocean. Well, it was whatever it was. We know that it had to be at least 10,000 years old, because that's how long it's been since the ocean was at that level. So whatever the structure was, whether it was man-made or whether it was naturally formed, we know that it was in existence, and we know that it was above the waves 10,000 years ago. Now, after that, we have to try to decide. So is it natural or is it human form? And even the experts disagree with, even friends disagree with each other over this. Robert Schoch, for instance, who's done so much work in the Egyptian pyramids and everything else, he believes it was natural. Whereas Graham Hancock, who actually dived on it and talks about it in his book Underworld, he believes it was man-made. But whatever the case, it was above the waves at least 10,000 years ago. And if it was not entirely man-made, it was probably at least shaped a bit by human hands when it was above water. So, okay, that would have put it in the time of this people who lived in Japan then called the Yeoman people. Yeoman people were fascinating people. I'm fascinated by this culture because I think they have a lesson that we desperately need to hear today. This was a civilization that existed for 16,500 years. We know that that's not just mythology. That's, like I say, that's archaeology and anthropology. They lived for 16,500 years. And in that time, their civilization changed very little. Their language didn't change very much. We have pottery that goes back 16,500 years. It was a special kind of yeoman pottery called corded pottery that had they would make it by forming the clay around these cords and stuff like that. This pottery is found, are you ready for this, from Fiji to South America. South American pottery that goes back to the beginnings of 16,500 years ago. Off the coast of California, they discovered these ships, anchors made out of stone that have been there for 10, 12,000 years. Who left them there? Embedded into the pottery was little grains of rice. Now, rice is a cultivated crop. What we're saying is the agricultural revolution was predated by the yeoman people 16,500 years ago. They were practicing agriculture. Then in the DNA, which is that's the gold standard nowadays, in the DNA of American Indian tribes and also the DNA of modern Japanese people, we find a common ancestor that lived for thousands of years around Lake Baikal in Siberia, which tends to make us think that 16,500 years ago, when the land bridge was opened to Siberia, it was the yeoman people who migrated not only east and into America, where they became the antecedents of many of the American Indian tribes. They also went down south into Japan, where they became the forebears of the Japanese people. Here's what they have to teach us. In 16,500 years, there is actually no evidence of warfare. There is no evidence of this great expansions that happen so far when civilizations have to grow or die or that kind of thing. I wonder, when I read stories like this, whether a group of people who lived 16,500 years ago learned the value of enough, whether they made a deliberate decision that they weren't going to overpopulate themselves out of existence, where they weren't going to technologize themselves out of existence, where they weren't going to practice warfare, where they wanted to live in peace. 16,500 years is a long time. And the first time evidence of war shows up is when they were conquered by a much more aggressive people in Japan, the ones who are now considered the ancestors of the Japanese. If we study civilizations like this from the ancient past and see all this, I wonder if we can learn from them that here was a people who existed for far longer than we've existed, who didn't fall into the traps that we're falling. They learned about how to say enough. Let's not go any further. Let's keep it the way it is. It's working. Why mess with it?
Right.
Great,
They were advanced,
great lesson.
but in a different type of way. They were
Yeah.
advanced in a more spiritual type of way, and the technology they used was different, even though it had powerful properties and it could do amazing things that we can't recreate with our own technology today. As far as construction, it was different. It was still a different type of technology, probably more frequency based from what I
think
hear
so.
a lot of researchers. You agree?
Yeah, definitely. I think so. I like to call it a psychic toolkit, probably, that we've lost. And the reason we lost it was because this people were conquered by a very aggressive people who went on to form the kind of civilizations that we see today in Japan and in America and everywhere else around the world. Yeah, I agree 100%. I think it was a psychic toolkit that is still present within us. We've just forgotten how to use it. That's all. But it's still there.
Now, you mentioned, this Japanese group of people that could have existed in peace for, like you said, 16,000 years. When you
Well, at
look at,
least 16,500 years.
that's amazing. When you look
Yeah,
back
yeah,
at
at
a
least that.
lot
Yeah,
of
yeah.
different ancient cultures and civilizations, it seems like there were different types of humans that existed back then, not just, just regular humans. We coexisted with giants, cone-headed beings, little people, all kinds of different. It seems like our DNA was vast in the ancient
Yeah.
times.
Can you imagine the scene? What might have happened had the Denisovan, who were up north in Siberia, made their way south to meet the Indonesian people who we now call hobbits? Here's 7, 8 foot, sometimes even 9 foot people meeting little 3 foot people, and realizing they come from the same place. We were a very different kind of race. We had a mixture. We had a yeasty thing going on it must have been tremendously exciting. And now we've homogenized it all. And ever since we've homogenized it all, the Denisovans are gone, the Neanderthals are gone, the hobbits are gone, the people are gone. And what have we had to show for it since they all left? We've got warfare, we've got starvation, we've got inhumanity, we've got all of this going on. It's just a sad thing. It really is a sad thing. We are a people, I think, who function best when we are diverse, coming together and recognizing that and understanding that diversity and using it. I think that's when we function best. That's what history can teach us if we just open our minds to listen to it.
Yes, I'd agree. I'd like to talk a little bit about what we were talking about earlier, out-of-body experiences. Now, I know you have practiced this yourself, sort of astral states and travel, and you studied with William Buhlman. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, I think Bill Buhlman is probably the foremost expert in out-of-body experiences teaching today. He was kind enough to give me a little blurb at the front of my book, I can never remember the names of the quantum akashic field. He was kind enough to read it and send me a little paragraph that I have in the first couple of pages. Bill used to teach us that this is available to just about anyone, and his mantra was 30 days, 30 minutes a day. He said that anyone who is willing to take 30 minutes a day and religiously practice that 30 minutes a day at the correct time, when your biorhythms are right, when your mind is right, find that time of the day when your mind works best. If you're too tired, you're going to fall asleep. If you're too jazzed up early in the morning thinking about what's going to happen, you won't be able to calm it down. Find that time that works for you when you are sufficiently rested, but not overly stimulated. And if you meditate for 30 minutes a day using some exercises that he's given us, and they're in his books and in his lectures. If you do that religiously every day for 30 days, you will have an out-of-body experience. And I'm here to tell you, if I had stopped at day 28, I wouldn't be talking to you today, probably. But the fact that after 28, 29, 30 days, finally, the first breakthrough happened. And once it happens, you all of a sudden stop becoming a believer and you start becoming a knower. And there's a great difference between knowing and believing. And once you experience it yourself, you'll never go back. And the sky is the limit. It could very easily become the most important thing in your life.
Yeah, and you say the sky is the limit. I think a lot of people don't understand what can be achieved with astral travel or out of body experiences. I mean, I've heard of people that have gone to different planets, people that have
Yeah.
gathered information from across the world,
Yes.
gathered
Yeah.
information about our past, their own past. I
Hmm.
mean, you have access to basically anything and everything if you can master these skills, right?
Yes. Yeah. And there are basically two kinds of out of body experience. And first of all, I guess I have to talk about out of body experience. I don't know. Nobody knows for sure if there's something in us that actually leaves the body, or if that's the impression we get because we can't conceive of it any other way. Quantum physics may have something explaining about this in their concept of entanglement. Two different particles which are entangled can be on opposite sides of the universe. And when one has an experience, the other will mimic that experience because they are entangled forever. Albert Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. That may have something to do with it. I'm not sure. But there are basically two ways of explaining it that work for me. One is the idea of etheric travel. Etheric out of body travel is any travel in which you are seeing the perception realm in which we live. Now, you may go to the farthest star in the universe, and you may see the whole universe, hold the whole universe in the palm of your hand, as I have done on two unbelievably humbling occasions. And they make you, but you are still dealing with the material universe. You are traveling within the material universe. There's another kind of out of body travel that's called astral travel, and that involves other dimensions that have nothing to do with this material dimension that we live in. Now, they may not be very far. They may be only a vibration or two separating us between these dimensions. But because the physics are different in each dimension, and because our particular five senses are attuned to just let in what's happening in this material dimension, we're just not in touch with that other kind of dimension. But if we can travel to other dimensions in astral travel as in out of body experiences, why can't they travel to us? Why can't they step into our dimension if we can step into theirs? The problem comes when you try to describe this kind of thing. You're dealing with a dimension, an entity from another dimension. And then all of a sudden you come back, you have an unbelievable experience where you say, as you said earlier, you get a block of teaching that doesn't come sentence by sentence, letter by letter. It's a block of teaching that somehow you just understand. It's almost like a mind transfer, so to speak. Now, how do you describe that in English? Because English or any language was invented to describe what happens on this side of our own particular cosmic fence. So how can we come back? We can't say this is what it is. All we can say is this is what it was like. And it can sound pretty fantastic. So when you think about this and you start thinking about these earlier out of body experiences that we were talking about a while back, seeing angels, angelic beings, or perhaps hybrid beings that have angels or heads of animals or something like that. Does it mean that this is what they look like? All we can say is, well, it's the best I can explain it in given the ramifications of the language that is here. It may not have been this exactly, but it was like this. It felt like this. So yeah, I have no doubt too that when we're talking about uh, astronaut theory or ancient astronaut theory or UFOs or something like that. I have no doubt we're talking about two separate things at the same time. Are there nuts and bolts spaceships that actually come from other planets? Yeah, I think such a thing is perfectly possible, given a science that's way above ours, but it's possible. On the other hand, I think some of them are probably also describing experiences or encounters with entities from other dimensions that are no farther away than a couple of vibrations to us. And I think we have to keep both in mind when we're talking about these. Our people have been talking about these forever. Our language talks about elves and gnomes and fairies and leprechauns and all kinds of things like this. I think these are all words to describe actual entities that really exist. And we just have to be open to it. It's not crazy. It's science. Open our minds. If it's there, let's check it out.
Yeah. Like you said, once you experience it, it becomes knowing. And once you
Oh,
know,
yeah.
there's no going back. And
Yeah.
yeah, me experiencing that myself, I'm so glad that I did. To have that sense of knowing, there's a comfort behind it because you
Hmm.
know that you're not alone and you know you're not crazy. These things do exist. Like you said, I think it is a combination of both. There may be beings coming here and they're saucers or whatever from a different galaxy, but I think a majority of it is just entities that are in a different frequency or density or
Yeah.
dimension, whatever you want to call it. I
Hmm.
think if the UFO fields of research came together and could understand that it's both and stop kind of arguing
Yeah.
over it's
Yeah.
nuts and bolts or it's this, we could get a lot further in the UFO field research.
Yeah, I think so too. And when you stop to think about it, it makes perfect sense. If you consider that we all come from source, we don't know what source is, but we come from source. We come through consciousness, what both Einstein and Stephen Hawking called the mind of God. We journey through the Akashic field. We come into quantum reality, which I like to call the place of thoughts and intuitions. From that quantum reality, we are still energetic, but we are individual beings for the first time. In source, there is no individuality. In source, it's all together. We're all one, perfect oneness, perfect unity. We leave source to gather up experiences of those in that individual experience. We travel through the newly discovered Higgs field where energy takes on mass. And we're out here in material reality manifested, what I like to call the perception realm. Now, if we make a choice to come into this dimension, into this place at this time, and travel out here to the edge where we live in the material world, why can't, when we're back in source, make the same choice to go to a totally different kind of dimension and have a totally different kind of reality with a totally different kind of individuality? It's simply a matter of a different experience. That's all. So what we're doing, when we meet these entities from other dimensions, I like to just say, "Well, I'll see you back at the source," because they, like us, they have a different rules of physics. They're following a different kind of existence than us, but we all come from source, and from their experience and whatever dimension they're in, and from our dimension and our experience, whatever dimension we're in, we're both going to meet back at the source and realize that the only thing that differs in our experience is the kind of manifestation we had. One was a physical manifestation described by our laws of physics. One was a different dimension described by different laws of physics and a different. But Hugh Everett gave us the many worlds, the many dimensions, many universes, the multiverse, and a lot of physicists accept that nowadays. Why can't those different universes be considered different dimensions? Why can't they come into our dimension? Why can't it be that at Christmas time, when Christians gather together, most of whom don't believe in different dimensions, but they sing, "Hark the herald angels sing," or "Angels from the realms of glory"? They're talking about entities with wings that look different than us, but somehow similar to us, and they're stepping out of their dimension into us. All of a sudden that stops being religion, and it starts being practical experience. It starts being science. But in order to get it, we have to study it. In order to study it, we have to open our minds to it.
Now, when you're talking about source, do you think that all beings that originate from what we would call source share this collective consciousness? All beings that are of the light and of this source, that we still share this collective thought and consciousness.
Yeah, I might even go a little farther and say that perhaps source is consciousness. uh, and when you say we're open up to all kinds of things when we do out of body experience, all kinds of information, I'm not sure, but that we have this experience so we can carry this experience back to the source. and we can deposit it in what is called the Akashic field or the Akashic records or the Akashic library. And out of body experience can give us information to that. Even in physics, Stephen Hawking was uh, very brilliant in this when he talked about nothing being able to escape from a closed system. And in a black hole, every bit of information that goes into a black hole is somehow still present there. Perhaps it's on the edge of the black hole, in which case, if we were to view it, and it would be a two-dimensional figure then on the edge or on the surface of the black hole. But if we were to shine the right kind of energy beam through it, it would all of a sudden become a hologram. Which might be what we are. I don't know. It's just hard to say. But all that energy, all that knowledge is there because that's what we came here to do, is to experience literally the infinity of knowledge that we can only experience as individuals. Now, I'm not saying that this is the way it is. I'm not starting a new religion here. I'm saying that this makes sense to me. That's all. It's helped me. And if it can help anybody else, great. But please don't say this is the way it is, because that's what Jim said. I don't want to ever get into that kind of a thing.
Now, for the last few minutes we have, I'd like to talk a little bit about some ancient construction practices that are fascinating to me, such as the doors to nowhere that are built into like a side of a mountain or the side of a rock or a temple. These doors that appear, like they can just go somewhere, but they go nowhere. Do you think that these were some sort of interdimensional portals or some sort of device of that nature?
I sure have to be open to it, because I really do believe that the old ones, the ancients, uh, working with the psyche as in ways that we just don't do. We're too fast. We're too loud. We're too excited. We're too ego driven. But the ancients could spend much more time with this, and I think they did discover portals. Um, Either that, or perhaps even made the portals possible through their intention. And I think they were once used. And I think we have portals all around us. There's a place down below us where we built a medicine wheel, my wife and I, and we have become convinced that it is a portal to a dimension that I can never understand. I had a healing down there when I met people from that came through that portal, wise women who actually healed an ankle. I tell the story in quantum physics. Haven't got time to go into it now, but in quantum Akashic field, where it was an actual physical healing of a very badly sprained, perhaps broken ankle. Uh, that happened right down there in that portal. Now, where did these wise women come from? I think they came through the portal that we opened up when we built the medicine wheel. And now years go by and people come along and they see this strange edifice and they say, well, what does it do? They go through it, doesn't lead anywhere. So, okay, let's block it up. So they block it up. Or perhaps it's been blocked ever since it was built, but it was blocked in a way that seems to us, it seems blocked because it seems solid, but perhaps given the right intention and perhaps given the right frame of mind, it wasn't a blockage. You could just go right through it. Um, I, I, I know that there are people who say, well, we have to be very careful with these things. We have to be careful, because these people, these entities might mean us harm. I just don't think so. I think we cannot operate out of fear. Consciousness is the universal source, I think, and along with consciousness, and the other word that keeps coming up time and time again is love and empathy and compassion. And I think if we approach the universe and approach these mysteries with that kind of an idea, I think there are beings that want to protect us, that don't want to hurt us. Now, obviously, there's evil out in the world, so probably, there are probably evil beings. In Christianity, we call them demons, and sometimes in Muslim things they call them jinns, and all this kind of thing. But basically, on the whole, I think when the Bible says God saw all that He had made, and behold, it was very good, I'm going to take that literally until proven otherwise. I really am.
Yeah, I personally believe if you're a good person and you approach these entities with good intentions and you're seeking out the good entities and not these darker ones, you don't have
Yes.
bad intentions, that's the experience you're going to receive, that they're kind
Yeah.
of attracted to that. And if you ask for it enough, that they will come to you, because that's what
Yeah.
I've experienced. And many people have told me that, they've asked for it enough, it'll happen.
I think so. We've lived in a very violent time of human history for the last 8,000 years. Uh, 10,000, well, 8,500 years ago was the first time in the Middle East, for instance, we have a city, Jericho, perhaps the oldest city in the world, that still standing. All of a sudden, they started building gates around it. The emphasis is that before that, it was not a violent time. It was not a warlike time. This means that if we've been on the earth for 300,000 years, which many anthropologists are accepting now, a minuscule time has been involved in this time of violence. And I think this minuscule time of violence in which we live has colored our own thinking and made us suspect that whenever you see somebody, you're going to naturally go to war with them. You're going to be naturally, they're going to have your worst intention at heart. That's a very minuscule time of history, but it's the time of history that has trained us to think that way. Maybe we need to go back and start thinking as we did for the vast, vast majority of time we were here on Earth. And that's good intentions and positivity.
And, I was told during these communications that love and empathy is a major thing lacking for the human race now,
Oh,
and that really needs to be one of the focuses brought back.
boy,
So
there's a
I really
lesson.
agree.
There's a lesson. Yeah, yeah, that's wonderful. Well, thanks for
Yeah.
sharing that, Chris.
Oh yeah, of course. But yeah, before we close out tonight, I'd like to get if you you could give us a little bit preview of what you're going to be presenting at Forbidden Knowledge NewsCon.
Well, it's funny you should mention. We were just starting to work on the PowerPoint for it a little bit. We're going to be talking about hidden histories, and we're going to be talking a lot of the same stuff we've talked about tonight, but in a much more developed, much more systematic way. We're going to be talking about the hidden histories that are hidden from us, and also the hidden methods that we've been talking about, and how we can do that in the context of the whole thing. We're going to be talking about what we now call ancient gods. Who were they? Supernatural gods. Who were they? Where did they come from? And we'll be presenting a lot of evidence that'll be kind of a bringing together of my books, Ancient Gods, Supernatural Gods, Hidden History, and Censoring God, all put together in one time. But we're looking forward to that. If anybody is interested in finding out any more about this kind of stuff, or if you would like to get in touch with me, I love to get in touch with readers, or listeners, viewers. If you want to go to my website, www.jimwillis.com, or .net rather, jimwillis.net. You'll also find my Facebook page, and also my YouTube page, which is kind of a new thing. We're bringing out, we've already brought out one YouTube on dowsing, and we've got the second one is being worked on now. The third one is planned. There'll be about 6 of these. It's designed to take a person from a beginning dowser into more advanced things. I also have some of the more formal presentations of stuff that we've talked about in this last hour. So, and there's a contact page. Send me an email if you'd like, jimwillis.net.
Awesome. That sounds great. Jim, thank you so much for coming on again today. Very much looking forward to your presentation in April. And until next time, take care and have an excellent evening.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. We'll see you now.
All right. Everyone else, have a great night.